What really shaped you the most while growing up?
I have personally seen 5,000 years of human progress. The reason is that the future is not evenly distributed, where there are some parts that are advanced, some parts that are not. And because my father was a farmer, he lived in a very rural part in Rajasthan, just a very basic, very primitive way of working and living. And because I've moved here now, thanks to the magic of the opportunities that I got over here, I have seen tremendous change, tremendous progress.
What kind of got you into technology?
In my high school, I ran into a book called How to Teach Yourself Programming. Of course, I had never seen a computer in my life. I used to write programs at night just on paper. I mean, they would never run, of course, there was no computer, just because I was imagining what it would be like to run a computer. And that's how I fell in love with technology.
Founder and chief engineer at Engineering Capital. Maybe tell us, where did that word came from?
The name chief engineer, because my job is to engineer capital. I invested in a company called Robust Intelligence. This was started by Yaron Singer, an assistant professor at Harvard, when he decided that he wanted to start this company. Last year, Cisco acquired the company. They have this entire product line called Cisco Intelligence that is all based on Robust Intelligence. Right now in AI, for the first time in technology, we are seeing innovation at all layers of the stack. But there's nothing which says tomorrow morning somebody will not wake up and write a new paper and boom, everything is out of date because something like that happened. So it's a house of cards. The fraction of people who return, and fractions become massive numbers if there is a compounding effect. Because when smart people work on a problem, they not only solve that problem in an interesting way, they educate a whole bunch of other people on how to solve that problem smarter. And the entire level of execution gets raised. And so that is what I predict will happen in India.
My guest today is Ashmeet Sidana. Born in a small village in Rajasthan in a mud house with no water or electricity, he picked up programming from a discarded book. And that changed his life. From Stanford to VMware to Foundation Capital, and now founder of Engineering Capital, manages about $250 million. He backs the boldest deep tech founders, the ones who take real risks. In this episode, we cover courage, failures, AI, and the future of AI. Now I bring you Ashmeet.
Ashmeet, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Ashmeet, what a journey you've had. A village in the Rajasthan to being at the cutting edge of Silicon Valley. Not just being at the cutting edge of Silicon Valley, you're helping shape that entire ecosystem in Silicon Valley. But before getting into that, Ashmeet, we're really a byproduct of our environment. What really shaped you the most while growing up in India?
It would be hard to pinpoint a single thing as what shaped me the most. The way I like to describe it is that I have personally seen 5,000 years of human progress with my own eyes. And I'm not 5,000 years old. And the reason is that the future is not evenly distributed. People live, and certainly you see it in India, but you see it in every country in the world, every part of the world, where there are some parts that are advanced, some parts that are not. And because my father was a farmer, he lived in a very rural part in Rajasthan, mud house, no running water, no electricity, just a very basic, very primitive way of working and living. And because I've moved here now, thanks to the magic of education, thanks to the magic of the opportunities that I got over here, I have seen tremendous change, tremendous progress. And I think that has been the biggest defining moments of my life.
Mm-hmm. And Ashmeet, you always wanted to get into technology. What kind of got you into technology, and what made you move to the US? What was the story behind it?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that I always wanted to get into technology per se, but I was always keen to work with my hands. I think I was born an engineer, and on a farm, there's a lot of things to do with your hands. You're constantly working, you're constantly building, growing, changing, fixing things. And so I did have that experience to do it. In my high school, I ran into a book once, which was on a discarded pile, raddi as we say, a book called How to Teach Yourself Programming. And I happened to pick it up. I read that book. That was the first time I heard the word programming or software or computer. Of course, I had never seen a computer in my life. And I read that book, and it was just so fascinating that you could actually make a machine like that. I used to write programs at night. Just on paper. I mean, they would never run, of course, there was no computer, just because I was imagining what it would be like to run a computer. And that's how I fell in love with technology. Coming to the US at the time when I came, in the late 80s, early 90s, India had still not liberalized. This is a much different India that I was growing up in. It was a closed economy following largely a socialistic pattern. And so the opportunities were in the US. There was no question about it. And I had a circuitous route. I kind of followed my way through education and work. Ended up here in Silicon Valley at Stanford and HP, and then I never left after that. So as I like to say, I've lived within 5 miles of
Uh-huh.
where I landed over here, and that's where I've always been.
Uh-huh. And Ashmeet, after graduating, what was your first job or in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, that's a more complicated story. I had a job at HP. They are the people who sponsored me, so I'm very grateful to HP for giving me that opportunity. But I also had admission to Stanford. And so part time, I was going to school at Stanford, which was something I worked out with HP because obviously I didn't have money. And so they funded my education, which is how I ended up over here.
Got it. And Ashmeet, you started a startup at a very young age. What was the startup about, and what really convinced you to go do that startup? And also, you need courage, to do that because, again, like you were trying to build your life, in Silicon Valley, and and you wanted, and with all those things, you ended up doing a startup.
Yeah, so I'm so glad you brought up the word courage because my elementary school motto was courage is destiny. And I do believe that courage is a very important ingredient in terms of where people end up. In many ways, it is destiny. In my case, it wasn't a lot of forethought. It wasn't like tremendous courage at that time. I was working at Silicon Graphics. It was obvious to me. Now, in hindsight, it's very clear. But at that time, even inside the company, it was clear that we were going to hit a wall. Silicon Graphics was a great company. It was a fabulous company. It's literally the buildings which Google is sitting in today were all built by us at Silicon Graphics. And I was fortunate to be working over there. But something had changed. Ed McCracken, our CEO, had resigned. We had a new CEO. The way technology was being built, I could feel something was not okay. I went on a sabbatical, and my former boss's boss's boss said, "Hey, I've got this interesting technical problem. Would you like to take a crack at it while you're on your sabbatical?" Remember, I'm single, I'm on a sabbatical, I've really got nothing else to do at this point. And so for a couple of weeks, I took my crack at the problem. And I did have an interesting solution. And he said, I'll pay you for it if you want to do it. And that's how I started SSI.
Mhm.
So I was like, okay, maybe I'll leave SGI. And so I literally went back from my sabbatical, walked in and said, thank you, but I'm not going to restart. I'm literally going to resign. And I ended up starting SSI.
Mhm. Got it. And that was a good exit for you at a really young age. And then post that, Ashmeet, I think you ended up taking a break after that, or you went to Wharton. Walk us through the journey post the acquisition.
Yeah, unfortunately, my life has never been a straight journey. It has always been these sort of meandering paths that I have gone through. And as I like to say, there are no straight lines in nature. Nature always has a meandering path. So after selling SSI, I took 3 years off. I was traveling, I was discovering myself as a person. Who am I? What do I really want to do? It was a decent exit. It wasn't like some gigantic exit IPO or anything like that. But I had the freedom that I could travel, I could do what I wanted. I did a trip to Nepal, to Mount Everest, not to the summit, but just exploring, trekking. I volunteered in the Coconino National Forest over here and started my MBA at Wharton, again part time,
Mhm.
and joined VMware as a director of product management, one of the very early employees at VMware. So it was sort of a meandering journey as I was discovering myself in terms of what do I really want to do? Because doing a startup is very intense. It's a all or nothing, 996 culture, 7 by 24, however you want to describe it. And so emotionally, I had to give myself time and space to discover myself. And that was that phase that I took. I thought it was going to be a few months. It ended up being a few years.
Mhm.
That is advice that I still give to my CEOs when they have a big exit. What I tell them is that you've been running at 100%, you've been running at 110% in some cases. That's not something you can do forever. And you must give yourself time to recover, to regenerate, to build yourself if you're going to go make another effort.
Mhm. Ashmeet, you mentioned your career has never been a straight line. Is that intentional? If so, why?
It is absolutely not intentional. It is very much a product of the environment. It's what the circumstances that you find yourself in.
Mhm.
Why did I go to Stanford? Because I didn't get admission to MIT. Why did I work at HP? Because they gave me a job and said they'll pay for Stanford. I mean, there's all these interrelated things, that connect, which allowed me to find that path.
Mhm.
And Steve Jobs, who I'm a great fan of, one of the greatest product managers to ever live, he likes to say, if you haven't heard his commencement address at Stanford, he has a wonderful commencement address where he says that if you want to discover a passion in your life or a great opportunity to do a startup, he doesn't use exactly these words, I'm paraphrasing,
Mhm.
but he says you have to try things, you have to work with them, you have to experiment, and you will only connect the dots in hindsight. I did this, which led to this, which led to this. Those dots cannot be connected in advance. You don't know what you're going to go into. So it's the journey. It's about discovering, experimenting, and finding these things. And my life has very much been like that. For me, the constraint was opportunity. I grew up with no opportunity. And so it was all about, how do I find an opportunity? What's the next step? What's the next step which would let me grow? It wasn't some grand overarching vision. If you had told me 20 years ago that I'm going to be a venture capitalist, I would have said, venture what? What is that?
Yeah.
I had no clue what venture capital was.
Talking about venture capital, Ashmeet, you ended up getting into the industry. I think your first, experience was at Foundation Capital. Maybe tell us, the story behind what made you join Foundation Capital, and what was the experience? What was the hardest part for you, uh, being a venture capitalist?
Yeah, so I think there's two questions really over there. One is, how did I become a venture capitalist? And that was another one of those accidental meandering journeys.
Mhm.
I was at VMware. VMware was doing extremely well. I was running ESX server. It was about 90+% of the revenue of the company. I had like the plum job, in terms of the company. But the company was sold. And so, because it was sold so early, I was sitting there going, and remember, I wasn't the founder of VMware, I was only an employee. So I was like, well, now the upside is capped, right? I mean, what is going to happen? What will be the outcome over here? And so, after about a year, I decided to leave to start another company. And that's when I started talking to some venture capitalists, to some people about potentially raising money. I met Catherine Gould, Mike Shue, Bill Elmore, and Jim Anderson. Three of them were the founders of Foundation Capital, and they changed my life. I mean, they literally said, "Hey, why don't you try your hand at venture capital? You're young, you're energetic. We're going through a transition at our firm. We are going to build and grow our firm. Spend a year with us, see if you like it, and we'll see if we like you. And we don't really know you, you don't know us. It's a very trusting, deep, complicated decision to bring in someone as a partner. And we'll decide in a year or two, and you can make the same decision."
Mhm.
Well, I joined them as an EIR, as an entrepreneur in residence, then venture partner, then general partner, and then eventually managing partner. I was running the firm with my partners over there for the last several years. And I learned the business. They taught me the business. They introduced me to the industry, and I will always be grateful to them for them opening this door for me.
Mhm. And Ashmeet, post that, you started a firm which was, I feel, I might be wrong, was pretty unique at the time, and you in fact named it, or named yourself not as a managing partner but as a uh, uh, chief engineer.
Yes.
Yeah, founder and chief engineer at Engineering Capital. Maybe tell us, where did that word came from, and also what gap you noticed in the market at the time, which led you to start on your own, which is called Engineering Capital.
Yeah, so the gap I noticed at that time is actually a gap that even exists today. And therefore, it is a structural gap that exists all over the world, but also in Silicon Valley. And that is what I call deep tech ish software companies, companies taking technical risk at the inception stage. Now, you would think that in Silicon Valley is the area where everybody knows deep tech, everybody understands this. There are many great firms that are deep tech investors that have invested in all the famous companies: Microsoft, Cisco, Facebook, Oracle. These are all venture backed companies. Google, etc. But the reality is that if you are a technical founder, and if the primary risk that you're taking is technical, for the inception stage, there's really no other venture firm that exists. And so, because I was an engineer, because I had gone through that journey in my own company and at VMware, I felt that I could add value over there. And so, without getting into too much detail, I designed Engineering Capital with the help of Catherine, who was the founder of Foundation Capital. She was the one who was instrumental in helping me design Engineering Capital to really fill this gap. And the name Chief Engineer is a little bit of a joke. It's a little bit of a pun. Of course, I could have called myself General Partner or Managing Director, which is the most common title over here. I decided to call the firm Engineering Capital because, one, I focus on engineers. All my companies are started by engineers. And so we are venture capital for engineers, hence Engineering Capital. But also because it's a little bit of a joke, my job is to engineer capital. I don't write code anymore. I engineer capital now. You take in a small amount, you return a large amount. And how do you do that? And so it's a little bit of a pun on that. And so chief engineer was kind of a natural outgrowth. If you define your job as engineering the capital, my job is as chief engineer.
Mm-hmm. Ashmeet, maybe for the audience, walk us through one or two investments where you applied this thesis when you were evaluating them, and what was the outcome of those investments?
Yeah, so I'll give you two examples. One of a company which recently exited. So I invested in a company called Robust Intelligence. Robust Intelligence was started by Yaron Singer. He's a PhD from Berkeley. He was an assistant professor at Harvard when he decided that he wanted to start this company. And I met him, and he said that he had unique technology which could protect AIs from adversarial attacks. In other words, an AI attacking another AI. And remember, this is 2017, 2018 when I'm talking to him. And I was like, wow, this makes so much sense. But is there a business in this? So we spent some time, we talked about it, and he convinced me that there was a business. Remember, this is well before ChatGPT. This is well before any of these things had happened. And so I became the first investor. Yaron moved here from Boston. He came here to Silicon Valley with his co-founder, Kojin. Eventually, Sequoia ended up leading the Series A. Tiger ended up leading the Series B. And then last year, Cisco acquired the company. And today, if you go to Cisco, they have this entire product line called Cisco Intelligence. That is all based on Robust Intelligence. That's the company that I was the first investor in. So that's a very classic Silicon Valley journey, a very classic engineering capital journey in terms of a small seed amount to take some technical risk, prove that you can actually build a product with something, then scale it up with traditional venture capital. In this case, happened to be Sequoia Capital and Tiger. And then, acquisition by a company like Cisco, which is obviously a large public company here in Silicon Valley. Another example I can give, and I'll give an Indian example. Naveen is the founder and CEO of a company called Evinced, Evinced. Very interesting company. He was at Oracle, Wharton MBA, smart guy, grew up in India, did engineering, came here, did his MBA, very typical Indian immigrant journey. And he came to me and said, I'm going to start a company to solve accessibility in software. So I said, what is accessibility? And he said, accessibility is making software usable by people with special needs, people who are handicapped, who have limitations, who have special needs. And I said, that sounds really interesting. And he said, I'm going to do it with AI, and I build a vision model, and I'll do this and do all of that. And I was like, man, boss, that sounds really interesting and really good for the world, but is there a business in that? Remember, I'm a capitalist, right? I'm a venture capitalist. I have to make money. And then he said the golden phrase. And what he said is, yes, the magic of what I do is not only does it make my software better for people with special needs, the way we solve it, we make it better for people who don't have special needs. In other words, it affects all of software. And I was like, wow, that would be massive if you could do that. And so I became the first investor in Evinced. We subsequently raised a Series A, Series B. We recently announced a Series C. We have firms like Insight, Vertex, Microsoft, which is a partner of the company. They're all investors in the company. We have unique technology that makes your software better for all users, not only users with special needs. Of course, we do it with AI. And so he's built a pretty big company. I have very high expectations. The company has not exited yet. It's a mid-sized growth company now. I'm still on the board of the company, and I have very high expectations for what Naveen is going to build.
Mhm. And Ashmeet, look, you're onto your third fund, and I think you're managing about $150 million as a solo GP. You're considered as one of the top, GPs in the Silicon Valley. Ashmeet, we know about your successes. Let's talk about the failures, the biggest lessons that you've learned that have come hard way.
Lots of lessons learned in venture capital. As I like to say, my hair was not gray before I became an investor. Just a minor correction. I'm currently investing my fourth fund. It's a $75 million fund. I have about over $250 million under management. But in terms of lessons learned, perhaps we can take particular examples, and I can share examples where I failed, as a venture capitalist. So I invested in a company called Panologic. It was a very interesting technology. Two guys out of Stanford, young, very early engineers, and they had a stateless way of building an endpoint device. They had built a stateless way of building a thin client. And I was like, wow, that's really clever. Became the seed investor. We subsequently raised over $100 million from Mayfield, from Goldman Sachs, from Com Ventures. I mean, like great firms, good firms. So I wasn't the only idiot who invested in the company. And we actually got sales. We started growing our business, started growing revenues, hired a CEO, built the product, and eventually failed. I mean, lost all the money. 100% of the capital was lost in that company because the mistake we made in that investment, and I'll take partial blame for that, is that the strategic landscape was such that a thin client could never succeed. It could never have been a venture-backed company. Now, obviously, I'm not the only person who made that mistake. As I mentioned, we had many other investors, board members, good people in the company who all made that same mistake. So, understanding the market landscape, the strategic landscape against which you are playing, is absolutely critical. That is a function of your analysis. It is a function of your learnings, how much you can learn about it, but it is also a function of luck because strategic landscapes change every day. Facebook was a different company on the day before Cambridge Analytica and it became a different company the day after Cambridge Analytica. So strategic landscapes change all the time. And so you have to stay up with it. And so there's a luck element to it. And in the case of Panologic, we lost cumulatively over $100 million in that investment because we did not understand the strategic landscape.
Mhm.
This should have been obvious in hindsight on day one.
Yeah. Got it, Ashmeet. And look, Ashmeet, you've been investing and paying attention to, now it's called AI. Earlier was machine learning. Uh, did you see ChatGPT moment coming? And what do you see moving forward? What are the biggest opportunities in AI moving forward?
So I did not see the ChatGPT moment coming in the sense of the way it happened and the speed and the dramatic worldwide impact that it had when ChatGPT came out. Because remember, machine learning or AI, however you may define it, has been on this gradual increase, for many, many, many years. I would say AlexaNet in 2012 was the real moment when the eyes popped open, when everybody went technically, including myself, went like, wow, this is going to be very interesting. And ChatGPT, of course, came much later, more than 10 years later. Um, so these types of adoption moments happen when a technology is adopted. We have examples of this happening with motor cars, with the Model T Ford. We can give you examples from aircraft. With the jet engine in terms of adoption, that occurred. The internet boom.com. So every technology has had this type of a moment when it became essential to the success of that technology and became seminal to it. But usually the technical path underneath it has been a long, slow, steady growth rate.
Mhm.
AI is a transformational technology. At a minimum, I believe AI is as transformational as the desktop PC, as the internet, and as the iPhone was. And it is possible that AI will be even more transformational than that. So it is clearly at least a generational technology. it might be a multi-generational technology. Where are the opportunities in AI? AI is it's a very interesting phenomenon that we are seeing in AI, which we have not seen before in technology. So if you study computer technology in particular, and in particular, if you look at sort of the venture-backed side of that computer scale technology, every previous generation of computer technology, there was one element of the stack where innovation was happening. So in the 1950s, IBM, basically builds the mainframe, very successful company, builds this huge monopoly. DEC comes along and builds, the PDP series, the mini computer, and they build the world's second largest computer company by effectively, innovating on the microprocessor. Fast forward, in the 80s, we have the desktop PC. Again, IBM invents it, but really Apple, Macintosh, Steve Jobs, some of those things really enable that. And because of that, we see this massive explosion. But the innovation was really all happening in software. And it was really Microsoft that captured that game and became, for a while, the biggest company in the world because of that. And so every time the innovation was always happening in one part of the stack. For a while, it was operating systems. For a while, it was microprocessors. For a while, it was, memory systems, etc. Right now in AI, for the first time, in technology, we are seeing innovation at all layers of the stack. In other words, at the chip level, we have companies, like Grok, like the TPU at Google, etc., where people have tried to innovate at the chip level. There are people at the systems level who are saying, no, this is really a systems problem, and we are just going to use NVIDIA chips, and we're going to build systems, and we're going to try and innovate at the system level. There are clearly people at the models, people who get a lot of press these days, OpenAI, etc., who are innovating at the model level. And then there are vertical applications on top where people are doing very interesting innovations. I mentioned Evinced to you as an example of my portfolio company, which is doing some very interesting innovation, leveraging all the benefits of the innovation that is happening. But there's nothing which says tomorrow morning somebody will not wake up and write a new paper, just like the transformer paper was written, and boom, your architecture, your chips, your orchestration, your memory, everything is out of date because something like that happened. So it's a house of cards, right? I mean, we are literally sitting on a house of cards over here. And that's what makes AI so exciting. I think there are opportunities at every layer of the stack. At a minimum, there are opportunities in the enterprise because enterprises will adopt AI enormously. At a minimum, there are consumer opportunities. You see things like augmented glasses, interpretation, translation. These are just obvious applications which we are all going to take for granted. So there are massive opportunities in AI.
Got it. And Ashmeet, do you have a viewpoint where not many people would, believe your point in terms of AI, like what's going on in AI?
Sure. I mean, I have some contrarian viewpoints. The traditional wisdom that you learn in business school is that all great investments are contrarian. In other words, you have to have some insight which is different from what the rest of the world believes. Otherwise, it's just common knowledge. And if you're investing in common knowledge, you will get common results. If you want uncommon results, you have to invest in something that is uncommon. So I would say at the core of every single one of my companies, there is some somewhat contrarian belief. But let me give you a macro contrarian belief that exists in the world right now where we are seeing a lot of things. Right now, there is a general rush towards putting large amounts of capital into these companies. So every company raises more and more money, and people are doing $100 million seed rounds and $1 billion follow-on rounds. And NVIDIA is announcing a $100 billion investment into OpenAI, and OpenAI is signing a $300 billion deal with Oracle, et cetera, et cetera. I believe venture capital, true venture capital, is practiced in a very capital efficient way. I believe in AI today, there exist many capital efficient opportunities, and great software, including OpenAI, by the way, has always been written by a two-pizza team. Whether you go all the way back to the Data General days, if you haven't read this book, Soul of a New Machine, it got the Tracy Kidder. It's a great story about how this machine was built. All the way up, through the history of the Mac, how Facebook was built, how WhatsApp succeeded, how Google was built, any of these companies, VMware itself. At the core of these companies, there is a two-pizza team. In other words, a team that you can fund with a handful of $1 million at the most, which can create real revolutionary software.
Mhm. Ashmeet, over the years, look, you've had a amazing career, professional career in US. Uh, what's been the most or the most difficult thing that you had to overcome while building your professional career in the US?
Well, I would say the biggest thing for me was that I was born fortunate that I was good in my studies. So I found studying easy. I would go to school and I would get good grades and I would come back and it was like, wow, okay, that's how life works. And it took me quite a while to figure out that there is no true success without hard work. And because I found school easy, I had become lazy. I would not put in that effort, that grit, that repetitive, diligent, daily effort that is necessary to do great work. And so I learned that late along the way. It's a discipline that I've had to learn. Whether it's going to the gym, going to the gym just because you went last week, it doesn't change what you have to do today. You still have to go today. If just because you went last week doesn't make that work. And so that is a personal work habit which I had to grow over years. And it's taken me a while to grow that. And it's still something that I think about. I have to consciously tell myself, okay, we are now going to work hard.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I look for a shortcut. I'll be lazy.
Mhm. And Ashmeet, look, you've helped many people in the US. One of them is we know Ashu at Foundation Capital. You've been a big part of his career in venture. Ashmeet, for you, were there a few people that really kind of like changed the trajectory for you in your professional career?
I already gave you some examples of that. I mentioned Catherine and Mike Shu, who brought me into venture capital. I would not be a VC if it wasn't for them. Very early in my career, Ken Kirshner was a manager at HP who had moved to Silicon Graphics, who actually gave me the opportunity to move from HP to Silicon Graphics. And Silicon Graphics was the defining job for my career. At HP, I was very young. I was still studying at Stanford. I was, obviously working at HP. And I learned some good things. I learned about how big companies work and I learned about some of those systems. But at Silicon Graphics, I learned what true excellence is like. What I like to say at that time is what it took 10 people to do at HP, one person could do at SGI in half the time. That was sort of, I would just walk down the hall and I would feel like, wow, that's the difference between in a company which is doing good work and a company that is doing great work. And at Silicon Graphics, I learned how to do great work. In fact, there is a paper that was published, which I read at that time. As you can tell, I love to read. I love to give suggestions to people who like to read. If you want to go and read, there's a paper by a lecture that was given by Hammond. Hammond is a very famous person in computer science. We all use Hammond codes. In fact, right now you are recording using a Hammond code for compression. He used to work for Bell Labs. And he wrote a paper, or he gave a talk on the difference between good work and great work. And if you're interested, you should go read that paper. It's online. You can just go and download it from anyone.
Yeah.
And at Silicon Graphics, people were trying to do great work, and I was working with some great people, and I learned that. And I thank Ken Kirshner for giving me that opportunity and opening the doors of Silicon Graphics to me. Like this, I can give many other examples. I mean, I've had teachers, Professor Lodish at Wharton. He had a huge impact on me. He was a very thoughtful, very interesting. I mean, there are many great professors at Wharton, but Professor Lodish, he made an impact and he changed the trajectory of how I think about myself.
Yeah. And Ashmeet, talking about India, you've had a very successful investment in India called Azure Power. And also, I think you were investing in India as well through Foundation Capital. Ashmeet, over the years, you must have paid some attention to what's going on in India in the Indian technology ecosystem. Uh, Given your experience of seeing how Silicon Valley was built, what's What's your view on Indian technology ecosystem? What are you most excited about the ecosystem?
So I'll start with the caveat that I'm a little bit out of date on India. I mean, when I was working, on India, it was a while back, and I never really did anything there other than that single investment in Azure Power, which obviously became a huge success, went public, multiple billions of dollars were returned. And so it was a great success. But then I hired Ashu Garg initially to work on India, who made some other investments, and then eventually Foundation Capital pulled out of India at that time. This is a long time ago. And so my experience is out of date. But as a distant observer, what I can tell you is that I am very bullish on India. I think there is tremendous opportunity in India today as an entrepreneur, as a technologist, as a venture capitalist when I see what is going on in India. We have all the raw material. There are great engineers. The government is supportive. The access to the world markets is very real. And most importantly, people now have tasted blood. They've seen what is possible, how much wealth can be created, how much change can be created by leveraging technology. And so I'm very bullish on the outcomes that we will see from India over the next 5, 10, 20 years. And I'm hopeful that these trends will continue. What has been missing in India in the past was those deep research roots. People forget how much of the true innovation in America actually happens in universities. And it is that university commercial partnership, that's a very porous border that exists between those lines. So you can go all the way back to the 60s. Bose, I mean, everybody has used Bose, obviously an Indian entrepreneur who came to MIT, started the company, and then gave all his money back to MIT. That's a virtuous cycle that exists in America. India will have to build that in a deeper way if to succeed. That's the only ingredient that I think is missing, but it will take time. It will build. But the necessary prerequisites for success for an entrepreneur today absolutely exist in India. If you want to become a billionaire, the best way to do it is to become an entrepreneur and to leverage technology, because technology gives you leverage.
Yeah. Ashmeet, maybe quickly tell us the story behind Azure Power. That's the only investment you made in India, and that ended up becoming, publicly traded company, $2 to $3 billion in value.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, my life has been a meandering story. I was not focused on clean tech investing, on solar or India when I met Inderpreet, who was the founder and CEO of Azure. I met him when he was a student at Haas, which is the Berkeley Business School at Berkeley. And he was an enterprising young student. We stayed in touch. And he came to me one day and said, I'm going back to India. I'm leaving Oracle. Remember, he was a software executive. And I'm going to work in this clean tech space. And I said, best of luck, congratulations and best of luck and have a good journey. And then he came back to me a few months later and said, I've got this brilliant opportunity I've identified, but nobody will give me money. Like, I'm unable to raise money, and I've pitched the best of the best VCs. So I read his pitch. I sat down with him in a meeting, and he had such a cogent pitch. It was such a thoughtful pitch. And his pitch I still remember it. I mean, it was just a one-line pitch, which is that the cost of solar cells is dropping, and the cost of electricity in India today is so high that we would be profitable on a non-subsidized basis if we started selling electricity from solar cells.
Mm-hmm.
And the third leg of the stool was that the demand for electricity is so high in India that we still do load shedding. We still turn power off to potential users of power because our power plants are not sufficient, because we are capital constrained. It's a poorer country. We don't have power plants. These three things are that's printing money. I mean, you're buying solar cells and you're going to sell electricity in a market which has infinite demand. And so he was unable to raise money. And so I took a risk, right? Venture capital is about risk. And I said, okay, I'll give you money to build a 1 megawatt plant, just 1 megawatt. And this is what it costs. And it's a few $100,000. And if you can build 1 megawatt, we'll figure out what to do. Mm-hmm. I took a chance. And to his credit, he built that 1 megawatt. Subsequently, we built over a gigawatt. Now, of course, there are multiple gigawatts that were built. A gigawatt is roughly the size of about a nuclear power plant, just to give you a sense in terms of power. And so, to his credit, he then added to that great insight execution. Successful entrepreneurial companies is only 1% is identifying the opportunity, 99% is execution. This is a guy who worked 7 by 24 day and night, executed beautifully under difficult circumstances, and built a real business, a profitable business, which he took public on the New York Stock Exchange. And so I'm very proud of that investment and of the good that came out of Azure. There are people today who are getting electricity because of solar cells that we bought 15 years ago, that are in the ground, which will continue to generate power for the next 20 years because of what Azure did.
What a story, Ashmeet. Look, you mentioned, if you want to be a billionaire in India, start a technology company. And now, things have been changing, Ashmeet. A lot of smart people or IITians, they are deciding to stay back in India because there's a lot of opportunities in India now. You can join Facebook, you can join Microsoft in India itself, or you can start a company as well. And on the other side, it's becoming difficult to stay in the US. What would be the second or third order effect? So let's say, folks who are high performing in US, top Indian diasporas, they start moving back to India, either to start a company or help a company scale to the next level. Through your experience, what do you see that could play out?
Yeah, I think it's going to have a huge impact on the Indian ecosystem and on the opportunities that will be created in India. Firstly, let's recognize this is not a all or nothing decision, right? It'll be like the fraction of people who return, the fraction of people who come, those fractions will change. And so these impacts may be a little bit subtle in the beginning to see, but over time they compound. And, fractions become massive numbers if there is a compounding effect. So this is clearly one that compounds, because when smart people work on a problem, they not only solve that problem in an interesting way, they educate a whole bunch of other people on how to solve that problem smarter. And the entire level of execution gets raised. And so that is what I predict will happen in India. So right now, programmers, software developers, engineers are much more productive in the US than in India because they are working in a more productive ecosystem. There's an entire ecosystem around them that generates and supports that high level of productivity. In India, the productivity level is lower. That productivity level is increasing very fast, and it will increase even faster in India when these people come back. And so, yes, 1,000 flowers will bloom, and we will see many more Zohos and Postmans and companies like that get created in India, and that trend will only get faster and faster when that happens.
And also, I feel the ambition or the mindset of thinking even bigger, because they've seen that scale in the US and they kind of can translate that into the. And also, I feel the ambition or the mindset of thinking even bigger, because they've seen that scale in the US and they kind of can translate that into the Indian technology ecosystem. And Ashmeet, moving to our final part, it's led by my co-pilot in the back. I don't know if you can see him. His name is Alfonso. So he wants to know, look, we know you, as an entrepreneur, as a technical person, as a venture capitalist. What do your friends know you for? Who are you outside of work?
What a wonderful question. You can use a couple of words to describe me. One, of course, would be engineer. I am an engineer at heart. I'm a nerd. I'm a geek. I still read papers. I still go listen to the PhD defense at Stanford, when some good student will come up, because you learn, by doing that. So at heart, I'm an engineer. I'm also a father. I'm also a citizen. I'm also a venture capitalist. I'm also an investor. I'm also a husband. Those are all other roles that you play in life that you are known by. But I think I'm defined by my work, at least professionally, as an engineer.
Mm-hmm. And Ashmeet, what are you most obsessed about these days outside of work?
What am I most obsessed about? I would say what I'm most intrigued by outside of work, and this may seem contradictory to you, but what I'm most intrigued by outside of work is actually AI. So I have been reading about AI from a non-technical lens over the last several years. And I find it very interesting. What are the political impacts? What are the social impacts? What are the economic impacts? There's a great book called Prediction Machines by Ajay Agarwal, another member of the Indian diaspora, a Canadian professor at the University of Toronto, called Prediction Machines, which talks about the economic impact of AI. And there's just some fascinating things that you can learn and read about it. And so right now I am in the AI rabbit hole, and that's where I'm spending my time.
Got it. And Ashwin, is there something that people get wrong about you?
Wow, that is a question that will take some thinking.
Yeah.
What do people get wrong about me? Um, I think I'm a fairly transparent person, fairly direct person. I have become more direct and more transparent over time as I've matured. So maybe if people knew me 10 or 20 years ago, they wouldn't understand some of these things. I will say one thing which many people don't know about me is that I am very fond of music. So I learned music as a child. I'm very fond of music. And even today, you will find me listening to not only modern American pop music over here, which is probably the most common, but I may also be listening to, K.L. Sehgal from the 40s, or Lata Mangeshkar, or Kishore Kumar, or Muhammad Rafi, or, some of the classics, the great classics of Indian popular music. But I may also be listening to, someone who gave a great concert in the US, Western classical. I listen to all kinds of music depending on my mood.
Mhm. Love it, Ashmeet. Thank you so much for really spending some time here and walking us through your journey as of now. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Shiva. It was a real pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.